Hi, everyone. We're still waiting for a few people to join us. I'm Lisa Mangiafico from SIA headquarters, and we will be commencing in just a minute. But I want to thank everyone who has joined us and is joining us right now, logging in for the first of our two live question and answer webinars on understanding Soroptimist Club Insurance. As I stated before, I'm Lisa Mangiafico. I'm the Associate Senior Director of Records and Risk Management at SIA headquarters, and I work very closely with SIA's insurance team at Pacific Ag Insurance, including JP Holman, who is joining us today and answering your questions, also with Kaylin Aguida and Joanna Acosta, who you may be speaking with when you call Pacific Ag. So we'll go ahead and get started. I hope everyone had the chance to view the accompanying video or PowerPoint before attending today's event, which outlined some of the specifics of SIA's club insurance, including things such as how to figure what is the duration of your event actually is, the shared aspects of SIA's insurance, and how to make sure a new club event is properly insured. Today, we'll be handling questions through the question and answer feature, which is at the bottom of your toolbar. So if you have questions, please place your questions in that section, and I will take up the questions and read them out to JP, who is SIA's account executive and sales manager with Pacific Ag Insurance. JP has been with Pacific Ag for over 8 years. He built the nonprofit and commercial department at Pacific Ag Insurance from the ground up. He holds the very coveted CIC designation, which stands for a Certified Insurance Counselor. This accreditation is highly credible in the insurance industry, and only about 30,000 individuals in the country hold it. And I can attest that he is my counselor in chief. I turn to him quite a bit for counsel and advice and understanding. So please enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will start with a question from Marysville Soroptimist. So that question is, so we do not need a certificate of insurance for a one-day event with less than 2,500 people?
Well, a certificate of insurance is really a different thing. So it's if the venue is requesting a certificate of insurance. A certificate of insurance is just a snapshot in time and just proves that you have insurance at that time. So you don't need a certificate of insurance unless it's requested by the venue. It's to prove that you have insurance to the venue. But let's take it from a Soroptimist insurance point of view. If you have not emailed us to let us know that the event exists, or emailed headquarters to let them know that the event exists, we have not added the event to our spreadsheet. So even if it is within that parameters of one day event, fewer than 2,500 people, we still want to know that it exists so we can add it to our spreadsheet when we send the insurance renewal in every year, so the underwriter understands what it is that they're covering and the exposures that they have, and should they have any more questions on that. So it's a little bit broader of an answer than the question, but that's really what we want to have happen. That spreadsheet that we have is really paramount to making the renewal a fairly seamless renewal every single year, instead of having to start from scratch every year and ask everyone to give us what the events they do every year.
So I want to just jump in at this point and talk a little bit about that spreadsheet. We first had to do that spreadsheet in 2019 when we were undergoing our insurance renewal. And at that time, we were also undergoing a broker change when we joined with Pacific Ag Insurance in 2019. So that spreadsheet is absolutely critical. And we will be sending out a request to all clubs to update and do a new spreadsheet, basically a new survey, because we recognize that since the pandemic, the club dynamics and how they fundraise and what events they may or may not be holding any longer or new events that they've added, we need to have a better understanding of how that looks now. So we will be doing that likely in January, which is about 2 months before we start the main meat of our renewal process for the club liability insurance. So we don't have any other open questions right now, so I'm going to fall back on some of my questions. So JP, can you explain to us in a little more detail and a little more depth about the shared nature of our club liability insurance?
Sure. So for the clubs and the regions, there is one bucket of insurance, and that is shared for everyone. And for the most part, general liability is there's not necessarily a huge exposure there. Where I really want to focus more is understanding the bucket of insurance for professional liability and directors and officers in particular. But first of all, just the basics. There's one bucket of insurance that covers everyone. So all clubs, all regions are covered in that single bucket of insurance. When that bucket runs dry, there is no more insurance than that. So each club doesn't have their own bucket. Each region doesn't have their own bucket. It's all shared. From the D&O standpoint, to get clear on that, the D&O covers the directors and officers for every club and every region in America. So that is a very small limit. That's only $1 million limit. And that limit is shared to defend your personal assets as a club volunteer. So if you were to get sued for club malpractice as an officer of the club, that would cover that $1 million is all there is for everyone in your club and everyone in the region in North America or in the United States. It used to be North America. Sorry. So it's a low dollar amount. We looked to increase that dollar amount this year, and the market wouldn't bear it. What they said is really each club and region should probably get their own D&O insurance that's a standalone policy. So then that $1 million limit, if it was just for yours, might be sufficient for your club or region. But right now it is a shared amongst every single officer in the United States.
So JP, let me jump in and ask a clarifying question. At the present time, that D&O, the policy that we have for Seroptimist, is a buy-in that clubs need to buy into that D&O. So not every club in the United States has bought into that policy. Are the clubs that have not bought into the policy covered?
No, they are not covered.
So
Now
that so
there
that
is no,
means
go ahead.
so that means that their club officers do not have access to the protection of their personal assets.
Not from that policy. Now maybe they have their own standalone policy that I don't know about. Let's hope they do. And that's why they don't buy it. It's voluntary to buy, of course, and there is no time of year that you have to buy it. So it can be bought any month of the year is how it's structured. So, it might when we renew, it's not when you guys are setting budgets, and I understand that. So it might be something where if you're setting budgets now or this time of year, that you decide to purchase the insurance now. Then when we go and have the renewal, it will be the same thing. You'll need to purchase the insurance for the next year at that point in time.
So this is in regard to the directors and officers insurance, which is the voluntary policy that we make available, and it is once again a shared policy. So we have a question from Kristen Pisenda. Is the D&O $1 million per occurrence and per aggregate limit, or is there a higher aggregate limit?
It is $1 million. There is no higher aggregate limit.
So it's $1 million only.
Yes, it's different than general liability in that you would have $1 million per occurrence, $1 million aggregate. It is an only $1 million limit.
Thank you. What about bonding assets like checking, savings, and investment funds from Fannie Louie?
I love this question. It is probably the most common question I get from Sir Optimist people. I will bring this up if you guys call me individually. You usually will bring this question up, even if you call to not talk about this question, to talk about something else. So I'm going to give the basics of the difference between bonds and insurance and how I believe to manage the risk. A bond is a loan. And when you're getting a bond, you're guaranteeing, whoever it is, you're guaranteeing that that money be paid back. So the process to bonding is really a loan application. So if, let's say, Sir Optimus region, where here I'm in Hanford, let's say the one in Hanford and Kings County goes and purchases a bond, bonding the treasurer and the bank accounts. What they're doing essentially is taking out a loan should something happen. So Seroptimist Kings County would have to go and pay that money back, if that makes sense to you guys. So it's not a thing where like insurance where you're going to purchase protection and then that's going to cover you. So in my opinion, it's almost a waste of money. You're unless the person, let's say the treasurer were to go and say, I am going to bond myself and guarantee that that money be there. That's a different deal because then if the treasurer were to lose the money or something were to happen with the money, then the treasurer's bond would do that, would trigger, and then that treasurer would have to pay back that bond. I think a better way to manage the risk would be to buy insurance, crime insurance for your club or region. It's a better way to do it. It makes more sense. And it's a way to actually get coverage for that's insurance that doesn't have to be paid back. So you pay your premium. It's a guaranteed loss of the premium for possibly getting paid back where you don't owe any money after the claim were to happen. So that's the first part. The second part would be to manage the risk in some free ways and having there be multiple signers on the checks and different things where there's accountability and redundancy so that money just can't go out by the treasurer alone. So the check might be prepared by the treasurer and then signed by two other individuals who are officers in it. So three parties have to confirm that money be spent, which is a great way to mitigate risk and it's free. So those are my thoughts on it. But really bonds, I don't like the bonds. I know that Sir Optimist historically has purchased a lot of bonds, and many times the bonds that are going to be purchased exclude the officers anyway. So when you read your bonds, you may very well have purchased a bond that wouldn't even trigger to cover a treasurer anyway. So that is my opinion on bonding versus insurance.
So your opinion is that the club should look into a crime policy insurance.
Mhm.
I always answer this question also by saying most insurance seems to cover some legal fees, which bonding does not.
Right.
So you may have a lot of expenses in dealing with lawyers and trying to get money back. And so insurance usually does cover that. So that's why I always tell people it's like, yeah, but it's $400 or $200 an hour to deal with a lawyer, and you don't get that with the bond.
That's right. And the first sentence in on a liability policy is the carrier has the right and duty to defend. And those are important words because when you put that claim in, they will, and usually they will defend, but usually the limits are outside the limits of the policy. So let's say we have $1 million limit on the policy and they are going to defend you. That does not come out of that $1 million. So it's an important thing to understand. That's usually how insurance will work. So that right and duty to defend doesn't have anything to do with your limit, whether it be occurrence or aggregate limits.
So, thank you for that. That's, I think, a very illuminating discussion about bonds versus insurance. We have another question from the Marysville Seroptimists. If we are having an event for our members only, like, for example, a holiday party,
Mhm.
do we need to have tips training if alcohol is available? And then where can we find a link to TIPS training for other events our club hosts?
I would say yes, you want to have the tips training. Um, and I would still count that as an event, whether the public is there or not. If I was an officer in any nonprofit, I would consider the members to be guests. So even though they are members. Um, and then the tips training, I believe there's a link on the Seroptimus website for
Yes.
tips training.
Yes, there is. And so Nicole has posted in the chat the link to the page where all of the insurance information lives, including a link into the TIPS training. So that's where you can find that information and that link. So we have a question relating to directors and officers insurance from Region Governor Lola Abrahamian. Do you recommend purchasing D&O coverage from Pacific Ag since you are familiar with SIA, or should we shop around locally?
You certainly can buy it from us. It doesn't matter where you are, what state you're in. We're licensed in all the states. It really is a matter of trust. So if you already have an agent that you might work with that's a commercial insurance agent that understands D&O insurance for nonprofits, you can just ask them, say, hey, do you write this? Is this something you do to agent? And then that's great. Get it from them if you trust them more. If you want to get it from us, that's fine. We certainly understand it and can help with that. If you go and purchase it from another agent and say, hey, I have a question on this, and we need it reviewed, you can always email it to me too. And when I have time, I will review it and go and say, hey, this is what's going on. This looks good. This looks bad. And then I'll ask some questions on it. It's really a matter of getting the coverage that's right. So, and I won't charge you for that. I mean, it's free to go through and look at it. So in the CIC designation that I hold, we're taught and tested by the people who wrote the policy form on what the policy's intention of coverages means and what they want to do. So it's a helpful thing for you guys because even for other insurance agents, what we're supposed to do with the CIC designation is work with other insurance agents to make sure that they're writing insurance correctly. But you have access to the same thing. So we can go and say, hey, this is written right. Or I might say, I want you to get a sidetrack A of whatever and increase the limit of the personal protections based on where you are in the country and maybe the size and wealth of your officers. So, different parts are going to require more than $1 million, and then asking for that might be something that's wanted.
That's a great point that in different parts of the country, personal assets may be more highly valued than in other parts of the country. If you're buying a house in California versus you're buying a house in Kansas,
Right.
it may really skew that personal asset. So it may behoove you, especially in those higher um, expense states, to go to another policy to have enough money in coverage to cover your officers.
Yeah, I have one more thing to add. If you're going to go to another agent, ask them for a sidetrack A, and that's an increased limit for defense or of your personal assets. So there's different coverages A, B, and C on D&O insurance. A is the cover what covers your personal assets. So if you're in Orange County, let's say, and the average house is over $1 million, and you have 5 people on the board, you're going to want at least $5 million in coverage for that. So then you would ask for a sidetrack A of $5 million or whatever limit you choose, and that goes to cover your personal assets.
Okay, so for D&O insurance, ask for sidetrack A with the limit that your club or region would need to cover all of your officers.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat.
Also, if you go to an agent and they set that dollar amount, go to a new agent. There's no way an agent can ever tell you what that dollar amount should be. That needs to be a number discussed by you all in order to uh, figure it out.
Okay, so if you go to an agent and they set the limit, please consult with another agent.
Yeah, unless they're saying it's only $1 million because that's all that's available, that might be what the market bears. But if they say, oh, I think you guys are good with $3 million, I think you're going to have a potential for an errors and omissions on their insurance at that point in time.
Great. Is there any other information you want to impart on D&O insurance before we take a couple other questions? Okay, so Lola is asking a follow-up question, not necessarily related to D&O. Can the region board be held liable for something that happens in a club that has no insurance? And I'm assuming, Lola, you are referring to the D&O insurance.
I'm not an attorney, so it's kind of an attorney question. But in my experience of doing insurance, anyone can get named in a lawsuit, and judgments, especially in California, have not gone in the ways that might be predictable. So they might say, you might feel that they're not liable and still be held liable because that's where the money is. You know, the most famous thing from insurance was training new agents. I would say, there was a lawsuit, this real lawsuit, where there was faulty drywall that came from China. And in the suit, they held the drywall companies that hung the drywall were named in the suit. Obviously, the drywall company, the companies that made the nails were held in that lawsuit. So, the nail company has no real way of mitigating risk on what their nails are holding up, but they were still named in that lawsuit. So, we have another one where here it rained a lot in California this year, and there was a water district that they just opened the gates and closed the gates, and they were sued because there was basically too much water in the rivers, and they don't choose how much water is in the rivers. So, a lawsuit can come from anywhere, and the judgment then is a coin toss. So, in my opinion, there might be a situation. I could see a situation where the region might be held liable for the coverage or the decisions they make or do not make and how they manage the clubs. So, and then understand that D&O insurance really is, another way to say it would be professional malpractice. So if you think of it as professional malpractice, it might be a situation where a judge or a jury goes and says, well, that is professional malpractice because the region is in charge of the club. So that is where the responsibility would be held. And those are the experts, where the clubs might just be the people doing the work, more of the workers, less of the manager. But again, I'm not an attorney, so I would consult your attorney on that for the regions and whether or not they feel that that's a proper exposure. I do think that there's a possibility, though, that you would be added to a suit.
Thanks. That's kind of sad, but thanks. So I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the question and answer section right now. So I'm going to dig into my bag of questions and pull out the next question. And so in your webinar PowerPoint video, you spoke about club events and the multi-day nature of events. Can you just reiterate, please, how a club should consider whether it's having a one-day event or a multi-day event?
Yeah, this is a great one. So I think that could be an assumption that if you have an event on Tuesday or say Saturday that you set up for on Friday and take down on Sunday, but you do the event on Saturday, belief that that is a one-day event. And when I talked to the underwriter about this, the underwriter went and said, well, it's really up to the venue what they consider that to be. But many venues, I think when you take care, custody, or control of the event space, that would make that a 3-day event. So I don't want to leave it up to interpretation on whether or not that is a 1-day event or a 3-day event. I'd rather just go and say, hey, we have this event that's a 3-day event and add it to the spreadsheet and have it included for the next year. And that makes it so that we have automatic coverage for it and everyone's happy and safe. But I would consider that a 3-day event, in my opinion. And the reason why is because you're there. Now, the general public might not be there, but you're going to have members there. And again, to me, the members really are the general public as well, you know. So I would consider that a 3-day event.
Great. I think that's a really important point, especially during fall and spring festival seasons and during holiday shows and other events that clubs may be having in the not too distant future. So another question that we get commonly at headquarters, and which I always defer to your team at Pacific Ag, are questions about the event questionnaire, which is also related to new events or events that fall outside of the limits of our club liability policy. Can you talk a little bit more about that club questionnaire, please?
So that questionnaire is going to be usually for a special event policy. So it's I'll backtrack. If the event is not on the spreadsheet and it's more than 1 day and more than 2,500 people, then sorry, hold on one second. I got to just turn that up. Sorry. If the event has more than 1 day or more than 2,500 people and it's not on the spreadsheet, it's not going to be automatically covered. So then we're going to get a special event policy. And what that is a basic policy that's going to cover that day. That special event questionnaire or the event questionnaire is what we need for the underwriter to underwrite the event. So these are usually pretty cheap policies to get, relatively inexpensive, a couple $100 to maybe if it's a bigger event, maybe $1,000. So that's what that is for. The more detail you can give, the better. And anything that you're doing to mitigate risk, which is usually left out on that, would be great too. So underwriters can understand what it is that they're looking at and can give really the best price available.
So that would often apply to events that the club is having for the first time, or it's expanding from 1 day to multiple days. And so it would not be properly noted on our spreadsheet of events that are being covered by the club liability insurance.
Let's say it was an event that was going to go from 1 day to 2 days, but it's already on the spreadsheet and we know when that event happens. That would be a gray area where we would probably confirm with the underwriter. My guess is that the underwriter would say that they've already underwritten for that event and that is on the policy. Now, we still need to know that there's that change because we need to note that on our spreadsheet. So Joanna is here to take those emails and questions or calls to note that, and then she manages the spreadsheet for Kaylin when we do the renewal.
Great. And so I also want to note that SIA also manages that spreadsheet. We have clubs on the spreadsheet that may be disbanding in the course of a year. So we let JP and Pacific Ag know when clubs are disbanding. Please take them off of that spreadsheet or take their events off so that they are not being covered if they're not being held, because all of that does in the end impact the final financial assessment that we get for the coverage. So we are managing it from both ends. Obviously, the most important end is the end that JP has, so that we know what your events are and we know exactly what's happening with those events, so it can be properly covered. But we also do manage that from the headquarters process also, pretty much from the membership perspective of when clubs are disbanding. So we don't have any other open questions in the Q&A. Don't forget to add them there. We do have a question in the chat, which I will ask. If vendors are serving liquor and not Soroptimist members, do we still need to do tips training?
This is a great question. Tips training, I think, is good for everybody to do. You don't need to do tips training in that situation. You've transferred the risk to a professional. But what I do want to see then is to get a certificate of insurance. And ideally, we're going to have three things that we're going to get on that certificate from the vendor. And we want to be named as additionally insured. We want to have primary non-contributory wording, and we want to have a waiver of subrogation on that. And those are very common things to ask for, but basically, to make a long story short with that, is we've transferred the risk of the liquor sales specifically to, and the liquor liability to, the vendor who has care, custody, or control of the liquor. So, and that's where we want it to go to. That's where we want it. We don't want to be sued. We want their insurance to cover us if we get sued. We don't want our insurance to have to hold part of that, because we don't want the loss on our insurance. And it's a really great way that's free to mitigate risk and to transfer that risk right back to the responsible party. Do you want me to go over what those three things were again?
That would be great. And perhaps we can, yes, Lola is asking, can you please repeat the wording? So we want to be named as an additional insured.
That's right. We want to be named as an additional insured. What that does is makes it so that their insurance covers us for that specific project. We want to be named with a waiver of subrogation. So that means that their insurance can't come back after our insurance to get our insurance to pay after the fact. And we want primary non-contributory wording. That means their insurance is primary over ours, or under ours, and that ours is non-contributory. So if they go and they say, well, you have contributory negligence, we'll say, well, we have primary non-contributory wording on our policy, and here's the certificate of insurance they provided, and we are no longer liable for the contributory negligence that we might have.
Okay. Everybody good? Everybody understand that? Thanks for that question, Sarah. That was a great question.
Well, yeah, there was, and one more thing to add, just because we want to be named as an additionally insured, not an additional named insured. And I don't want that to get confused. They will come back and they'll say, we will not name you as an insured. And what that does is makes it so you have access to their whole policy. So you want to be named as an additional insured, exactly how Lisa wrote it. That is exactly what you want to ask for, and almost everybody will give you that.
So we have a question in the question and answer from Fannie Louie. If the event is held in a restaurant with a bar and they serve and sell the liquor, is this certificate needed also?
Typically, no, because they already have liquor liability as part of their policy, and you are holding that out as you have hired them as a professional at doing this, and you really don't have any control of the restaurant. And I think that you would have some vicarious liability coverage there as well. I also don't think necessarily a restaurant is going to give you additionally insured status unless you were going and really like renting the entire restaurant. So I think that if you're renting the entire restaurant, I might ask for it. If you're just renting an event space, say a room in the restaurant, I wouldn't think that you have really any exposure. The same reason why you wouldn't have any exposure if we were to hold an office party at a restaurant. The restaurant's insurance is going to cover us for that.
Great. I think that's a great clarifying bit of information because we know a lot of clubs and regions hold events and restaurants. So
Yep.
Lola is asking the same would be true for an event at a hotel.
Yeah, usually a hotel would do it, but I would still ask for it from the hotel. And the reason why I would ask for it from the hotel is because hotels will go and say, especially the flags, will go and say, no, 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 no. Your event was completely separate from the rest of it and the normal daily recourse of the business and daily course of business that they're doing. So, and it's a special thing that you're doing. So I would still ask for it for a hotel and at least show that there's some sort of risk management there. If nothing else, just so that later on, if there was an issue that came of it, you could go and say, we asked the hotel and they said no.
So we're asking the hotel for the certificate of insurance, or we're asking them for the tips training information? Can you
Well,
just clarify that?
if their bartender is serving, I don't think we have a tips training exposure where, or we don't think we need tips training because we're not serving. And tips training is for people actually serving alcohol. So having somebody tips trained though might not be the worst thing in the world, just as a club or region risk manager, which brings up a whole nother thing. Uh, but I would still ask for the certificate of insurance from the hotel that they have liquor liability, because there's hotels that don't have bars necessarily. So, and then they're not in their normal course of the day's business, they're not having liquor sales. So you have a special thing where you're having liquor sales. So I would still want that certificate of insurance with the same things on it, giving us coverage for liquor liability because it's not in their normal course of business. Might be a more clear way to explain it.
And so is there anything other than being named as an additional insured, named with a waiver of subrogation and a primary non-contributory wording that we specifically need to ask for in that instance?
Well, you'd want liquor liability. You want to confirm that it's liquor liability in that instance. And then you want to go and also decide what you feel is the right limit. Sometimes these contracts will say specific limits. They'll go and say, well, we want a $5 million limit or a $1 million limit. Now, understand that this is part of negotiating the contract when you're asking for these things. So there might be pushback on that, on whatever these things are asking for. And then strategically for your club or region, you have to decide whether or not what they're giving is worthwhile or not. So, but if they, lots of times they just give it to you because it's pretty standard.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the question and answer? I don't see any at this moment, so let me reach into my grab bag of questions. Oh, let's see, we covered that one. We covered that one.
While you do that, Lisa, I'm just going to give a suggestion. If I was part of a larger club, I might consider having a risk manager as part of a volunteer duty. Somebody who goes and says, okay, and thinks of what all the bad things that could happen, right? And goes and says, how can we mitigate this risk? And how can we do it with the least possible cost? I think that that is a really smart thing to do. And then also to go and say, hey, we want to have an insurance expert or a risk manager expert look at what we do have and how we're managing risk and how we're financing risk management, especially for the larger clubs. I think that that's really an important thing to do, because you might have somebody who if that's what they're focused on, may very well find ways of covering it and find solutions or find exposures that aren't there otherwise, that aren't otherwise thought of.
So for this volunteer risk manager, let me follow up. Is there any risk to the volunteer risk manager for assuming that position?
I would think that you would have the same risk that it could be considered an officer. I don't, risk managers sometimes are considered officers, sometimes not in organizations. It really depends on how the organization treats it. But you might have the same officer exposures that other officers have. So there's a possibility of that. But if they were to go and say, it's really just a volunteer position, same as being the uh, person who organizes events, if you have a specific outreach coordinator, for example, or something, you could go and say it's just a voluntary position that's not part of the officer leadership team, in which case you're just a member and that's your volunteer task of which it is you're doing. But I think there's risk anytime you're doing anything. So, you know.
I'm beginning to come over to your side, JP. I'm now the naysayer at headquarters. Like, oh.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I have that came out of the webinar and that you touched on briefly earlier today, but I kind of want to get back to it, is an understanding of the different types of coverages that you think a club should consider having. So we have club liability, shared club liability insurance. You've talked about directors and officers insurance and the importance of that, especially in some areas of the country where individuals may have a high asset value because of property, as well as personal finances. But what other types of insurance do you think a club should be considering? For example, should a club in our climate now be considering cyber insurance?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is cyber insurance is, if in my opinion, the biggest exposure that anyone has right now is cyber. And it is an unseen risk in that, you understand auto insurance because you've seen a car accident. You might hear of cyber claims, but only the biggest ones make the news, and they happen every single day, all the time. And it can be a catastrophic thing. And it really, going back to a D&O perspective, you could say it's professional malpractice to not have cyber insurance. So you could potentially have a situation where you have a treasurer who knows how to hack the system to get into accounts, gets the accounts, or a former treasurer is able to get into the accounts and gets the money out of it. So you have a crime. So you need crime insurance. It happened online, so it might need cyber insurance. And then you also have a D&O exposure there, in that none of the passwords were changed, and or she was able to access the information, and or you didn't have the policy so that it causes damages. So you could have one claim with multiple different policies covering, and all of those things could be mission critical to the chapter. And then all of these are shared limits too. So it might very well put the situation where every single club and region is dealing with this major claim, all from not having proper insurances in place. So that is a pretty big, the dollar amounts probably aren't going to be that much because there's, Sir Optimus isn't a multi-billion-dollar organization, right? So the dollar amounts might not trigger to be huge dollar amounts, but cyber is huge. Another one where the cyber would trigger is social engineering, where, I get an email from Lisa saying, hey, we need your club to give us $10,000 for insurance costs for this year. And you're going, man, that's odd. It's not the time that we do it. Why is it so much? But you guys just send the check anyway because it says Lisa's name on the email, but it's at Yahoo instead of SIA, right? So that's social engineering. So cyber insurance would cover for that. Also, all the membership's names and addresses, information that you have, should you have data breach on it, you have to provide 1 year of credit monitoring for all of those members and information that's been given. So that is a huge exposure that may very well come from a cyber event. So cyber insurance is very broad. It's constantly changing. They constantly change the names of things, but basically it's first party and third party insurance all wrapped up in a single policy. The price of it has gone down a lot in the past 2 years or so. So it's definitely a place that I would consider each club and region would probably get their own. We've looked at trying to get a cyber policy for all the clubs and regions, and it hasn't been necessarily the best thing. So that's what I would suggest, but it's something to continue working on.
And so, in follow up to that, I would just remind everyone that, password management is huge. It's a free way to mitigate your risk for, cyber. Making sure that you don't have one password to get into a club website, like your club number or your club name, that each individual person has, a unique way to get in, because you want to be able to track who's getting in, and you don't want that information to be um, inadvertently exposed. So it's really important to do that password management to make sure that you're taking care of that. Matter of fact, yesterday I fielded a phone call from a club whose SIA email had been hacked. And so we, had to do some resets in that
Mhm.
club email portal in order to stop that hack and, reset the password. So um, password management is a huge, huge deal, and you should be changing your passwords every time you change officers. Every time.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions in the chat? Or I don't see any in the chat, and I don't see anything in the question and answer. So have we answered everything that you have questions about, or is there something else that you're burning to ask about? Here's your last chance. We have 10 minutes.
I'll go over a common question.
Okay, great.
If you have a claim or something that you think is going to be a claim, turn it in as soon as you possibly can. Now you can turn it in to the underwriter or to us. You would turn in claims to us, and we can discuss whether or not we want to send that claim in instantly to the carrier strategically, or if we want to wait. But almost always we're going to send it in to the carrier and tell them, hey, we're waiting for this claim to develop. There might not actually be a claim here, but let them be aware of it, because sometimes situations grow and it can be years that it takes, and they fester and grow and grow and grow. And then we get a giant claim where we could have been getting defense and could have been handling the claim with a claims adjuster. So if you do have a potential claim situation, let us know as soon as possible.
And they should just contact you directly, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Great.
Contact us.
All right. Anything else you want to add about how members can interface with our great friends at your workplace at Pacific Ag, or anything else that we need to know to smooth the way with insurance, which is always like a really hard topic for us to get our hands around?
Insurance is always a hard topic, I think. So I think it's a not fun topic because you basically have to think of bad things happening, right? And who wants to do that? So um, the best thing to do is do what we talked about here today. If you get to a situation you just don't know, you're going saying we didn't cover it, or I don't know and I need clarification, the best thing to do is email me to set up a call. Hypothetical situations, I get emails on hypothetical situations often, and I have no idea on how to answer them because they're hypothetical situations, and I almost always need more information, and I can't help on hypothetical situations. The best thing to do is call me and say, hey, this is the hypothetical situation that we have. What do you think? Because most of it has to do with claims, and I would go and say, I'm not a claims adjuster, so I can't tell you how that's going to play out. So I need more information usually. But if I can take time, I've spoken to many of you on the phone over the years. If I have the time, I will find the time within a reasonable time frame, say a week, to have a phone call with you. Usually it's the same day, to talk about what it is that you're going through and how we can handle it strategically. And I'll probably end up bringing up bonds in that conversation too.
So we have one last question from Lola, who asks, Are we covered when we use the SIA club and region email system, which is provided by Microsoft, um, and also provides some limited cloud storage? Are we covered when we use that SIA club email cloud storage capabilities from Microsoft?
Are we covered from Microsoft?
Well,
We're not covered from insurance.
no, it's the club email system is powered by Microsoft. That's who SIA uses as our club email vendor, basically. So she's asking about that cloud storage that comes with that product.
The short answer is no, not without a cyber policy. So no, and I don't even think that there's precedent right now to cover for Microsoft covering as the care custody or control provider. I don't think there's anything that I have seen. I haven't seen anything saying that those web providers or email providers are being held liable for your system being breached, even if they're the web provider.
So that means that the club or the region should have cyber, and that should be that's part of their cyber environment.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
So we have a question from Nancy Butler, who's, please asking us to put the insurance information in the chat. And Lydia has also put in your specific email address, JP, in the chat as a reminder. Earlier in the chat, we did list the page where the SIA insurance information lives on the SIA website. That there's a great tool, a resource on that page, which is basically a handbook and a guide about specifically the club liability insurance, but it also has the contact information there. And we also have that contact information on the PowerPoint. So if your club wants to use that PowerPoint / video that is posted on the SIA website on this very page where we have in the chat, you can also find all the contact information there. But JP's personal professional email address is in the chat. Thank you, Lydia. Any other questions? Going once. Going twice. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So since I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the question and answer, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the country, and to thank JP for being with us today to go over this information. Once again, he is an invaluable resource, and I strongly urge you or your clubs in your area or in your regions to reach out to him whenever you have any questions. So with that, we will end the webinar, but I hope everybody has a great day for the rest of the day, and we will see you sometime soon. Thanks so much, JP, and thank you
Yep.
to everybody at Pacific Ag.
Great. Thank you.